Jay and I have done this story so many different times, and I'm tired of it. That story that says you need $1.2 million to retire, and everybody goes, I'll never get there. Okay, I get it. So here was an interesting article, and it said, you know what? If you don't have $1.2 million to retire, don't worry about it. Go ahead and retire because maybe you'll get there in retirement. I was like, wow, okay. But their rationale was this. So many people get into retirement and they're only spending about 2% of their money. If you're spending 2% of your money, the market will probably bring you up and you will actually make money in your retirement years. You'll see your account go up. Okay, but what do you think of that whole concept?
So the number's 1.2 this week.
That's this week. Yes.
That's this week. Damn, next week it'll be different. And yeah, you know, we talk about that number all the time. So what does it range from? Would you say, Randy, like 900,000 to 5 million?
Oh yeah. I've seen 1.8, and then Susie Orman will come out and say 5 million, and then the guy from Shark Tank will say 2 million, or so. It's all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And we're talking about what's the right number. Well, let's not even worry about that because, I mean, we've established that's different for everybody, right? What we'll talk about here more is, and we discuss this pretty frequently as well, is how common it is for people that don't have a plan to either spend way too much or spend almost nothing. So why is that happening, right? The spending extra money part's easy. We could all do that with our eyes closed. That's not right. That's easy. So do you risk running out of money? Those people are typically like, well, I'll worry about that when I get there. What concerns me more with the people that we work with that are coming in where they're underspending, and I want them to enjoy their retirement. Right. So you work 30, 40 years to get to this point of retirement, and you've sacrificed and saved to get there. And then because there's no plan in place, you'll see people sometimes just living off Social Security. That happens all the time. We'll see couples coming in and, they're getting whatever, $5,000 a month between them for Social Security. And they've got these multi-million-dollar 401ks where you don't have to go wild and spend $20,000 a month, but you could easily double your income to, maybe $10,000 a month and still never risk running out of money. But it's not being done out of fear of running out of money, right? And so if you extrapolate this to the end, what happens? Your kids or somebody else gets all the money, and you never enjoyed it, right? Well, maybe that's your goal, but for most people, it's not.
Yeah. I've heard many people talk about, and you mentioned this, is, why do you want your kids driving Porsches to your funeral, right? But at the same time, the whole idea, I've heard people say, how long does it take to get kind of in the retirement mode, kind of find your lane there as far as retirement? Some people say it's 2 years. And some of that, I always thought that was, I'm figuring out what to do with my time. I'm figuring out who I am in retirement. But there's another factor to that, Jay, and that is that people spend so little money at the beginning that they finally see their money going up. And then they go, we better spend some of this. And it takes a couple of years for you to figure that out. I don't want that to happen for people that we talk to. I want people to kind of hit the starting line and go through the tape and just have fun when they go into their retirement years. Does it take a written plan for people to see it in black and white down on paper to say, go ahead and spend, go do it? Or is it still difficult to get people to do that?
Yeah. Once you go through the planning process and everything's laid out, it certainly adds a significant degree of comfort there, right? Just seeing how it all works. And you mentioned if you have a written plan, will that help you out? I've told you this story before. Some of our listeners would have heard it as well, but I'll repeat it again. So it was before COVID sometime. I can't remember if it was 19 or it was 2017, whatever. And the guy came in to visit us, and I think he was about 53. He was a couple of years before he would have been able to retire officially at 55 from the company that he worked at, right? And so he comes in, and right away in the first few minutes, it was very clear he was a bit of a do-it-yourselfer, right? And he's like, well, I do it myself. Like, I want to keep doing it myself in retirement. And I said, well, why are you here? Like, obviously, I know why you're here. He's not really sure that he's doing it right? And so that's why he's there. And I said, hey, look, I've already put some time aside. Let's chat, whatever. That's fine. Let's go through the plan that you've got. I'll give you half an hour, and let's just kind of address your concerns. And he said, well, I'm not really sure I have any concerns. My picture looks really good. And I was like, all right, well, talk to me about it. He's like, well, my plan is to retire at 55, which was a year, 2 year, 3 years away. It was coming up. He'd done a great job saving, right? So he had $1.5 million maybe in his 401k. And he's like, I'm going to take my Social Security at 62. Well, we can have a discussion about whether that's the right thing or not later. He's a long way from that anyway. And he said, I need about $10,000 a month to live on. And I've been doing this for decades. And pretty much if someone throws a few numbers at me, I've got this in my 401k, my Social Security is this much, I need this much to live on, I'm going to have a rough idea right away in my head. Are we in the ballpark here? Is this monthly income that you're going to need to retire on? Are we even having a realistic conversation about this being possible? And at his age, with the amount of money he had, I was just thinking to myself, something's not lining up here. And for a while, I couldn't figure it out. And he kept kind of talking about, what his plan was, what he wants to do in retirement. And so as we were going through it, I said, hey, let me ask you this, because he's just showing me raw numbers, right? And obviously there needs to be assumptions made here about, how are you going to invest your money? What's the growth going to be? What sort of inflation factor are you taking into account? Which, if you remember back to 17 or 18 or wherever it was, inflation was basically nothing. Right. We didn't have, we hadn't really had an inflation issue until 2022, 2023. And so, a lot of people, silly as it sounds, kind of forgotten about inflation, really. And so I said to him, the first thing I said is, all right, hey, let me ask you this. What assumed rate of return are you thinking you're going to get through your retirement? Now, keep in mind, right? 55, it's very possible he's retired for 30 years. Right? 85, right. That's very possible. Yeah. And he said 16% is assumed rate of return year in, year out through his retirement. I said, all right, well, what landed on 16%? Well, that's what I got last year on my portfolio. So I was like, all right, well, we'll come back to that one. What assumed rate of inflation? You're saying you need $10,000 a month. What does that $10,000 look like in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Where are we? Oh, well, I haven't put an inflation rate in. Okay. Well, now I understand why this looks so good, is that you're not operating in reality. You're not using real numbers that are going to make sense, right? And so that's a great example of what we've got here when we see a divergence of people spending too much or spending too little. Either there's been no planning done, and so the safest thing, maybe it's not the smartest thing, but the safest thing in their mind is, I just won't do anything. I just won't touch it. And you know what? If you don't touch it, you're not going to run out of it, obviously, right? So you check the box there. You're like, that's right. And look at the price you paid to not run out of it. Or we've got this guy, and the advice I left him with is like, hey, we're not going to have the opportunity to work together. You kind of do this yourself. But if it were my money, if I were you, I'd rethink that assumed rate of return. I'd rethink the inflation, cost of living never going up. I'd rethink all those things. So then you get people like him that I don't know what he did. I don't know if he redid his numbers, if he decided to work long or whatever happened to him. He's on the other end, right? You go headlong into retirement at 55 with the stats that he had. He's probably out of money in his early 60s.